Invisible speakers are the core of our strategy. Designed to disappear, any tagline Sonance has had over the course of its history, invisible speakers answer that question the best. For Sonance, it really is a product that if it was done correctly, if it could reproduce sound with the quality level of a visible speaker, that would truly be the ultimate brand promise. And I think that's why there was so much trust in letting us approach this very methodically and to spend the time to develop something that didn't have that it didn't have a set timeline. That it was more important to really develop a product that was above and beyond what has been experienced up to today. Sonance started with the acquisition of Sound Advance, which was the original invisible speaker manufacturer, because even back then, the people here realized that it was such a unique product and fit our strategy so well. But the sound quality has always been an issue, and dealers have always shied away from invisible speakers simply because they didn't believe that what the customer would get in the end is something that they would be proud of. So as we started the development of the new Invisible series, one of the things we knew we absolutely had to do was to deliver spectacular bass performance, but do it even if mud was applied over the surface of the speaker. When we started the development of the project and we evaluated the competition, we picked a material for the diaphragm. We did all this work. One of the things we did, which was kind of unusual, but it works for speaker people, which was we divided the speaker up into two parts and said, let's develop a really good wide bandwidth driver. Let's develop a really good woofer. This is the way you typically engineer speakers. They're kind of developed in parts, and then in the end, much like cooking, you kind of bring it together and blend the two things together. And so during this process, we worked on the two parts independently, and then in the end, when they came together, we were using other invisible speakers for evaluation and competitive evaluation, but it became obvious very quickly that their performance wasn't even close to where we are. And so in the end, we're using visible speakers like VP speakers as a competitive benchmark for this product. I have 100% confidence that if these were put behind a screen and you had no idea what was playing, in a million years, you would not guess this was an invisible speaker product, even compared to any of the competition's visible speakers. I know the invisible speaker category, there's been a lot of product, whether it's been our own or one of our competitors' product, that didn't achieve the kind of performance that we're talking about. And there's probably been a lot of people that have made that promise that their sounds just like a visible speaker. And the dealers are very well aware that once they're installed and they hear them for themselves, that they don't generally sound like visible speakers. They sound like a bit of a compromise. In the new Invisible series, there's no compromise in sound performance, and it's completely invisible. To be able to install something that sounds like a visible speaker, that's invisible, it doesn't get any better than that. What we've achieved with this is, it was something that I personally never thought we could get to. We put so much effort into trying to make these the best that they possibly could be. And what we wound up with when in the end even exceeded my goals to some degree. And I think it will be a long time before any of our competitors can equal this level of performance, if ever.
It's a big call to say that these speakers sound as good as a regular in-wall or in-ceiling speaker, a visible speaker. But those of you who know Todd obviously know that that's not something, a statement he would make if it wasn't true. And even myself, I know I'd heard those comments made about these products, and I didn't believe them until the first time I went into our performance room and I hit play and honestly thought that the controller that I'd pressed had selected a pair of VP86s, because I couldn't believe that invisible speakers could sound so good. The fact that we've got no compromise in visible speakers, no longer is there any compromise whatsoever in sonic performance. It's absolutely game-changing performance. So let's talk about the research, design, and the new technologies that we developed along the way to back up the fidelity and performance claims in the product. As a lot of you probably know, for the last 10 years or so, we've been using some software called Klipple. And the first technology that we applied that to was the current iteration of Visual Performance Series. And it was absolutely groundbreaking. Those of you who are around like I was when we launched it may recall that we would do shootouts between our old Visual Performance Series and the new product, and a couple of fairly highly regarded competitors, and nobody could believe what they were listening to. And that was because Klipple took the guesswork out of designing loudspeakers. It uses a laser scanner that magnifies the motion of moving parts thousands of times and allows us to optimize that motion in a microscopic level. It's the sort of things that means that we get, we can get linearity on the suspension of the magnetic field, that we can get consistent tonality at different volumes, but importantly, we get much lower distortion and we get much less coloration than we traditionally would. Now, Klipple was designed for traditional cone dome speakers, the sort of stuff you'd see in your normal visible loudspeaker, and it's great for doing that. The problem was it was not designed for flat panel speakers, and that caused a challenge, because everything that Todd's designed since VP he's used Klipple for, and obviously that's one of the reasons why all of our products, whether you look at Visual Performance Series and then Architectural Series and then Professional Series, Landscape Series, the IS6T, all of these products have had consistent voicing ever since. A lot of that was down to Klipple. Well, because he couldn't do it with invisible product, it caused a challenge. So what did he do? Modified out the equipment. So it was adapted to be able to work with invisible loudspeakers, and we created completely new testing methodologies, which were interesting because we'd designed our previous invisible speakers like everybody else did, and they were kind of like a flat plane driver using existing driver technologies. If you looked at the IS4, for example, it had a tweeter, mid-range, and woofer. The voice coils were all bonded to the back of the diaphragm, standard style speaker motors. What we discovered through redesigning Klipple was that these anomalies meant that those ways of designing an invisible loudspeaker were never going to deliver the type of sonic performance that we had become accustomed to, or that we wanted to put our name on. So this redesign of the software revealed all of these anomalies, and we believe this is an absolute first for invisible loudspeakers. And because of the proprietary nature of the software that we've used, it now means that we've put even more distance between us and our competitors, because they're not going to have any way of replicating what we've done, because the software is not readily available. So it's a huge breakthrough. So how does Klipple work? This, we can see up there, there's two different sides of the measurements. The left side is the upper mid-range at around about 3K. Now it's magnified and slowed down 1,000 times, okay? This type of technology is excellent for low mids through to highs. It looks like dropping a pebble into a pond, and it ripples from the center of the diaphragm to the outside. This is what we call bending wave motion. For the bass side of things, we need something different. We need pistonic motion. And to do that, we have completely different driver technology. This motion is excellent for bass response. It gives us that extra extension, that low end that we've never had before, that dynamic and punchy bass. So we have these two different types of motions going on that are complement each other perfectly. But the key to the success is ensuring they don't interfere with each other. We don't want those ripples on the left-hand side on that bending wave breaking up that pistonic motion of the woofer. And likewise, we don't want the pulses of the pistonic style motion modulating our bending wave and causing discolored sound and muddy sound as well with distortion. So we've got to keep these two separate. So isolation is one of the keys to unlocking high fidelity in an invisible loudspeaker. So this is the front of an IS8, an IS8T would look exactly the same. Let's pull it apart and see what's going on. So how do we solve these challenges of making an invisible speaker sound as good and in some ways exceed the performance of an invisible loudspeaker? Well, we use something called motion flex technology. And there's a whole lot of pieces that go together to make that. It redefines what's possible as an invisible loudspeaker. So we look at all these separate pieces. Let's start unpacking what motion flexes is, starting with the diaphragm, obviously the very, very front of the speaker where the sound comes from. Now, invisible speakers need a front panel that's coplanar with the wall or the ceiling. In other words, has to sit on the same plane as the wall or ceiling so it can disappear and be completely invisible. Sonance studied dozens of different materials and in the end discovered that this fiber reinforced composite delivers exceptional consistency across the entire surface, flatness, which is important obviously when we're putting it into a wall, but also temperature stability. Some of you may recall seeing other invisible speakers, particularly ones that are only finish up to, and if they're in a wall that gets afternoon sun, as the wall heats up, you can actually see bubbles or a bow in the section where the speaker is, which is not good, obviously. So we have a waveflex drive unit to do those lower mids and deliver those crystal clear highs. It's a really interesting concept. It's not your typical tweeter. It's like a mid-range going even lower than a traditional mid-range all the way through to a tweeter. The other place you may have heard us talk about a wideband driver is with our Omni6T. We've put 4 of those around the Omni6T so that when we combine them with the woofer, we can run the crossover point lower so that you're not getting discoloration from any mid-range sort of coming downwards out of the outer ports of the product. This is the same thing. There was a cutoff frequency where that rippling effect worked best. And so by using a waveflex drive unit, which is a wideband driver, as I said, we get much, much better clarity. It delivers very smooth mids, crystal clear highs, and it extends right down into those lower mids with a very, very low crossover point. I think off the top of my head, the one in the IS8 goes down to 350 hertz, and I think Todd said we crossed it around about 400. I might be slightly wrong with that, but it's extremely low as a crossover point. Then we have the carbon fiber airflex woofer. Now, this does not directly drive the diaphragm, whereas the waveflex driver has that 44mm voice ball that's bonded onto the back of the diaphragm. The airflex woofer doesn't work that way. It looks more like a traditional woofer, but it sits in an air chamber which is sealed, and it's the pressure and vacuum as the speaker is going backwards and forwards that works in a pistonic manner and causes it to move that diaphragm in that pistonic manner. So we have the waveflex drive unit producing those low mids all the way through to highs. We have the airflex woofer for those low end bass frequencies. And then we need to acoustically isolate them with the acoustically isolating baffle. As I said earlier, it's really important that the two don't interfere with each other. They have to be treated like two completely separate drivers. So we permanently bond this baffle to the diaphragm, so there's no air leaks in this, so there's no risk of any movement from the woofer to the waveflex driver, back to the woofer, or even across to the sides, where obviously you want to get rid of any chance of any cracking at all. So it basically splits the speaker into two completely separate drivers. So the isolating baffle prevents the bending wave motion of the waveflex driver from interfering with the woofer and vice versa. So those two coexist without any interference between the two of them. So that's how this motion flex technology enables low distortion, that level of transparency. If you listen to the invisible speakers, you'll know they sound so open and so natural They just defy logic. Never been possible before with an invisible loudspeaker. So now we've talked about the technology behind it. Let's talk about the installation, because this is really, really important. I know in the past when I've spoken to people about using invisible loudspeakers, particularly in the commercial world, there is a sense of fear and reluctance because they know they are at the mercy of the drywall contractor. They know that if that drywall contractor, no matter how many times they tell them that you only need to put this amount of material over the drywall or gypsum, gyprock or whatever you want to call it, that when it's on there, there's no way of determining exactly how much material is on there. We had cases in the past with our previous generation of Invisible series where the dealer contacted us and said, the speaker doesn't sound as good as what I expected and what I heard in the demo kit. So we've gone back to them and said, did you apply only up to 3 millimeters of material over it, flexible material? Yes, we did. This is the material, drywall topping compound, only 3 millimeters. Are you sure it's only 3 millimeters? Yes, I'll watch the drywall contractor do it. Eventually, because there's no other solution, we get them to cut that section of drywall out and send it back to us. And guess what we find? 1/2 inch of mud over the front of the drywall. So that's never going to make these products something that a commercial integrator wants to embrace, because there's too much unknown that can create a lot of risk of having to go back and rework things, which is a huge problem, particularly if it means that the wall's already been finished over, painted, wallpaper, whatever it might have done to it. So that's not something we ever want to work with. So those of you who have installed Invisible Series before know that it's installed like a standard drywall patch. You have a hole in the wall exposing half the studs, and in a commercial job, they're probably going to be metal studs, not wooden studs, as we see here. And then the product is just installed into them like a drywall patch. So the speaker's screwed in there. Now, with the new Invisible speakers, the old ones used to come with two plastic shims that were 5/8 one side, 1/2 inch the other to suit US drywall thicknesses. The new product, the baffle is the thickness of your standard drywall, and then there's cardboard shims in the box to allow you to put those behind the speaker and then install them so that the speaker ends up on exactly the same plane as the surrounding drywall. Okay. Now, once that speaker is in the wall, make sure, even before, for me personally, you've connected it. I get somebody to turn it on and check it before I even screw it in the wall. The last thing you want to do is get that thing installed and get it finished over and then discover that you left the tap setting at the wrong level, or it's not working because somebody's a wire is pulled out or something. So always make sure before you finish over the wall that you've checked it, that the tap level is right, and also obviously the connection is right and it's working. So once that's done, now it's time to finish over. So we apply fast setting hot mud around the gaps between the drywall and the speaker, or the gypsum panel, gyprock and the speaker. And then just as that mud is about to cure, we use fiberglass tape and tape around the edge, doing a feathering the mud, taping it all around the edge. Now we can put a skim coat over the edges and even over the entire front of the speaker as well, up to 3 millimeters thick. The last step is to apply our final finish. So, for example, it could be paint. So we bring in the paint, and now the speaker is completely invisible. So that's one example. Paint obviously is just one finish you're going to see on a standard wall with an invisible speaker. It's compatible with a whole lot of different finishes that are on the market. For example, you can finish up to it if you want to. You don't necessarily have to finish over. Some people prefer to do that. So you can finish up to it. You can finish over it with up to 3 millimeters of flexible material. And that material can be drywall, mud or topping compound, wallpaper, paperback wood veneer, or acrylic-based finish and plaster. We say acrylic-based because it's flexible. You can't use a plaster base or a concrete base. I've seen that happen before. People saying the invisible speaker doesn't work and they put a layer of concrete over the front. That's never going to work. So all of those finishes are possible. As long as it's 3 millimeters or less, you're going to get outstanding results. But that was always the challenge in the past, as I mentioned before. How do you know you've only got 3 millimeters? So Sonance has developed a technology called Depth Identification Sensing Calibration System, or DISC for short. It's 4 steel discs that are embedded behind the diaphragm, allowing you to measure the thickness in front of the speaker. So basically, these 4 discs are there, and then once you've got material over the front, you can use the new Sonance DG1 depth gauge, which is just a standard accessory, to measure the amount of material on the front of the speaker. So here's an example of a speaker that's installed in some metal studs. It's got a layer of plaster represented, or layer of, should I say, topping compound represented by the pink line across there. You take the magnet, which looks like a chess piece that comes with the DG1 kit. You push the magnet against the steel disc to find the steel disc. You then get the depth gauge and you pull off the magnet and you put the sensor of the depth gauge and push it against the drywall. Now, in this case, you can see it's showing 4.5 millimeters, so you know there's too much material there. So from there, you basically say to the drywall contractor, you've got to sand some material off this, which they've done, and then you come back and you measure it again. And in this case, you can see it's 1.5 millimeters, so if it's within specification. So it's really easy to determine exactly how much material is there. So that finished thickness, ideally between 1 millimeter and 1.5 millimeters, or up to 3 millimeters max. So it's up to the installer what they want to do. It was always optimum to have thinner material on the front, but in the past, we could never measure it, so there was never any way of checking. Now, with the disc system, we have the way of doing that. Now, the disc system comes in the kit. The DG1 comes with a small metal disc that has a very thin layer of plastic over the front. It's the same thickness as the diaphragm of the speaker. So you calibrate the DG1 depth gauge using the black side of that disc, and that will deduct the thickness of the diaphragm from the front. So when you're doing those measurements, it is actually showing the material on the front of the diaphragm. It's not including the diaphragm as the thickness to the depth of those discs. So it's a very, very clever system. Now, while we're talking about installing these, I should also mention our regular low impedance invisible speakers have a much narrower mounting width. I think it's about a 10-inch center stud width. Because the IS6T and the IS8T come with a sealed metal enclosure, they work on a 16-inch or 406 millimeter on-center stud bay. So that's the width you require to screw these to the studs. Okay, so the low impedance product is much narrower unless you use the acoustic enclosure on those other speakers, which, if there's any risk of sound transfer to the adjoining room, I'd always recommend that you do. Now, another thing that we did in the past, but not as well as we're doing now, are space savers. Our old space savers looked like a piece of wood with quite a deep egg carton style material on the back. And the problem with that was they were bulky to store. If you're in a market like Don on the call from New York, it's a huge nightmare to take bulky things from, for example, an apartment in New York through the service elevator back downstairs. We wanted to make something that was far more versatile and reusable. So they're made like a pizza box. They're out of cardboard. You basically fold them up into shape. You put them into the studs when the project is still at frame stage. So if you don't want to go back and cut the hole in the drywall, or you want to ensure that the other tradespeople aren't coming along and putting a sprinkler pipe where the speaker needs to go, or an air conditioning duct, by putting these space savers in place, you're reserving that space to ensure nobody else takes it from you. As I said, they fold up like a pizza box, so you can take them on to the next job and use them, or you can recycle them if you want to as well, because they're just cardboard. Now, we also have Revit and BIM files, which a lot of consultants are using these days if they want to reserve that space electronically in the designs. So you've got the choice of doing it physically this way as well as in the designs, or if you want to be doubly safe, you just use both. The designer will use Revit and BIM, and then the installer will go in and use the space savers as well. So let's have a look at the commercial products, first of all, that are just being launched. We have the IS6T, which replaces a product called the IS2C, which most of you would not be familiar with except for Ken. They were a product that we did exclusively for Ken for those luxury retail spaces, but we've made the IS6T, which is a smaller product, available to everybody else as well. We also have the IS8T, which replaces the old IS4C. I got to say straight away, the IS6T absolutely blows the old IS4C cell performance out of the water, and we'll look at that in just a moment. When you pull these products apart, they look very similar to the low impedance product. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's the diaphragm, the acoustic isolating baffle, and the crossover, and the Waveflex drive unit, and the Airflex woofer. Where the commercial product varies is that they have a sealed metal enclosure, which for the US, Canada, and parts of South America are also UL certified. They have UL 2043, which means they can use in air handling spaces. Over here, that's known as plenum rating, and UL 1480, which means they can be used for emergency signaling and evacuation. They also utilize Sonance's laminated core transformer, which we all know from professional series, from landscape series, from the Omni 6T, delivers the performance you get from a traditional 8-ohm speaker in the 70-volt and 100-volt world. There is no compromise to sonic performance. Those transformers have less than a decibel of loss from 30 hertz to 30 kilohertz. So you can't hear any difference when they're turned into 100-volt or 70-volt. On the base of the speaker, we also have the screw terminals. We also have a cable relief zip tie. You'd be familiar with that if you've seen the old in-wall subwoofer, not old, the new reference behind wall subwoofers, and also the tap adjustment there with both 100-volt and 70-volt tap settings. There's also a steel cover with screws and a knockout, so that if it needs to be mounted with conduit, you can do that, or a cable clamp, whatever you need to do. We have GLL files ready to go straight away for these, so they can be designed using Ease Address, Ease EVAT, Ease Focus. Any of the AFMG softwares designed used to design systems are available straight away as well. The specifications line up as following. The IS6T has a frequency response of 50 hertz to 30 kilohertz. Let's just think about that for a moment. Currently, the best performance that we have from a commercial loudspeaker is the PSC 83RT. That has a frequency response of 55 hertz to 20 kilohertz at plus or minus 3. So this has more bass-end extension than, this is the little guy as well, than our current best 8-inch in-ceiling speaker. The IS8T goes all the way down to 40 hertz and out to 30 kilohertz. So incredible bass response. More bass response than if you were using, for example, the optional in-ceiling 8-inch woofer as well. So incredibly low end in these products as well. They're 6 ohms nominal. If you put them on a bypass, they have the flattest response of any Sonance speaker. So, I mean, the professional series were one of the flattest speakers we'd ever done. These are even flatter. So unlike the old product that needed DSP to get them to sound great, these things sound incredible out of the box. Now, if you're using our DSP amplifiers, we have various curves available for all of the invisible speakers, But a lot of these curves are more around how much material is being put on the front, whether it's a bright room, dull room, the usual things. The product itself out of the box, though, is incredibly flat. And of course, being invisible product and that flat plane driver technology, they have 170 degrees of dispersion. So that's one of the reasons a lot of these luxury retail boutiques like invisible products, because one of their goals is to have very seamless transition of both light and sound. A lot of attention to both so that the client is never distracted from focusing on the merchandise as they move from area to area to area. So when you have a speaker that's 170 degrees of dispersion, you don't get a noticeable roll-off of treble and mid-range. You can mount the speakers pretty much anywhere and you can't tell where the sound's coming from. And you don't need as many speakers because you're not losing your treble and mid-range when you're off axis. So there's a whole lot of benefits around the technology as well. The IS6T has a 30 watt maximum tap setting. So in a 100 volt area, you're going to get 30 watts and 15 watts. And the IS8T, you're going to get 60 watts and 30 watts. That 15 watt setting and 7.5 watt setting only applies to the 70 volt settings. Now, of course, we have the full range of low impedance and invisible products. I'm sure you guys are already familiar with this because you're dealing in both. There's the IS6 and IS8, which are exactly as what we just saw with the commercial product, except they don't have the metal back cannon transformer, etc. Then the IS10, which is going to give you more low end and more output, and then a couple of woofers as well, the IS10W and the IS15W. Now, Asia Pacific, you don't use UL, so you don't have to worry about the fact that they're not UL certified. The only thing they're not is 70 volt. So if you don't need 70 volt, if you're doing a boardroom or a home theater or a theater in a boardroom, whatever it may be, keep in mind that these products are available to you as well. So as I mentioned earlier, Sonance Invisible speakers have been used extensively in luxury retail boutiques. And Ken, who was on this call, is a major player in a lot of the names that you see in front of you there, the Louis Vuittons, et cetera, the Valentinos, Burberry's, Dior, all of these people have been using Invisible series speakers, some of them for a decade or more. The difference is that our new invisible products sound so good. And because we've overcome the installation challenges, they are a lot more appropriate in other segments that previously may have wanted either better sonic performance, or the type of dealers doing those jobs want a more accurate installation process. And so we can look at areas like luxury or high-end, high-profile corporate reception areas, boardrooms, specialty applications. For example, in Apple's headquarters, they've got a curved staircase, not so curved that we can't put invisible product in it. And they wanted to create an experience that as you go up that staircase, lights turn on and the music follows you up there. Well, the beautiful thing about Invisible series is there's nothing to see in that wall. And because you're up against it, the 170 degrees dispersion means that you don't get that anomaly of sound change as you get off axis. Same with Netflix. A lot of their corporate headquarters now are using Invisible series in unique applications with large displays, etc., where they want the focus on the visual. They don't want anything in the room to distract from that. Luxury restaurants, obviously, high roller suites in casinos and in suites in hotels, museums and galleries, they're perfect for that. Any places that want uncompromised sonic performance and aesthetics. This is not only the best sounding commercial speaker anyone would have heard, it's also one of the best sounding speakers, period, that anyone would have ever heard. So there's a lot of opportunities there. Like most of the product launches of late, we wanted to make sure that you have everything you need to be able to get out, sell these products, market these products, but also for the consultants and dealers to do their designs. So we have a stack of different resources, both on the website and in box, and I'm going to share that information in a moment. We also have Invisible series demo kits. Now, I know these didn't go to everybody, but they're not that difficult if you want to make them in your market. It's literally just a framed stud bay with a speaker in it and a back on it, and then a 2750 amplifier and a wiring harness. There is an instruction sheet that I've created that not only tells you what those pieces are of that puzzle, but it also provides a QR code with a carefully curated playlist that enables you to play exactly the right tracks to really amplify some of these features that we've got in these products, to show the bass response, to show the dispersion, to show the clarity and the openness and the fidelity. So I invite you to download that playlist and only use that when you're demoing these products. This instruction will also give you the talk tracks to talk through as you're demoing the system. So it'll go through what to play, how to play it, what to talk about, even down to the DG1 depth gauge, how to demonstrate that as well. So really important to understand that. This is actually in box, which we'll look at in a moment if you want to get a copy of this. So we have a new landing page for Invisible Commercial. So if you go to Commercial, then Invisible Series, you'll find an entirely new landing page, some shots of different installations. You can go straight to the product pages here, but then those key speaking points about the sound quality, about the installation, and then about industry standards as well are available on this page. Then when you go to a product level, like we did with Professional Series, we've done single pages for the commercial products. This was one of the points that was made to us when we first started doing research on Pro Series. The feedback from the dealers were, don't put lots of different products on the one page. I don't want to compare your different size speakers. I know when I need an 8-inch or a 6-inch or a 4-inch. I just want the specific specifications. And I also just want to get the appropriate download. So that's exactly what we've done. So we've got the specs, and then we've got the drawings. And then, of course, we've got all of the download material available, including the new Invisible Series brochure, the data sheet, the manual, the Revit and BIM files, CAD drawings, all of the materials you could possibly want to download. Now, if you want more of the support and marketing materials, there is box. And what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to copy that. I want to go back into, in a minute, we're going to share those two links with you. But inside here, you'll get access to these training presentations. Don't download them tonight, please. I want to resave them. I've made some changes today, so I want to update those. There's some email communication tools. There's a press release. There's the demo kit, which has the playlist I spoke about and the instructions, and even a video on how to use the demonstration kit. In fact, this week we've reshot that video. That will be updated probably either this week or in the next week or so. We've done it in the studio. The previous one I did at home during the COVID lockdown. And we also shot a short tech talk on the Invisible Series as well, which we'll be able to get. There's the commercial brochure. This should be your go-to sales tool to present to your market, because it walks you through the story of Sonance, James, and iPort, through Professional Series, through Invisible Series, through Outdoor with the IS6T and Landscape Series, and then all of the other products that are relevant. There are hyperlinks on that brochure to training, to the website. It's one of the most useful sales tools and gives you all the talk tracks you need for any of our products in commercial environments. So make sure to download that. There's the CAD and Revit files, there's the ease address files, there's the manuals, the data sheets, the drawings, the product images, everything you're going to need to access these files.